Hello and welcome to Nash Squared's final instalment to celebrate International Women's Day. Today we're going to be exploring the topic of women and allyship, and I'm joined by a brilliant panel of our leaders from around Nash Squared who are going to be sharing their views around allyship towards women both past, present and future. My name is Charlotte Johnson and I'll be your host for today, and with me I have Rona Carmichael, the Regional Managing Director of Scotland, UK, Northern Ireland, Ocko Ledding, the Managing Director of the Netherlands and member of the Executive Council, Cliff Ranson, Engagement Manager at Nashtec, and Christian Ums, the Regional Managing Director of Central Europe. If you do have any questions throughout, please use the Q&A function to submit them and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible at the end. So firstly, being the only woman on the panel, I would love to hear from you, Rona, and get your opinion on if it's still relevant for women to need allies in business today.
Yeah, do you know, this week's been really interesting. I sent an email to Ocko earlier in the week, just sharing some of my thoughts, and the global leadership team, we've had a lot of discussions about it. My leadership team has prompted lots of conversations just organically in meetings. And I had mixed feelings probably about some of these days in the past, because there's nothing worse than kind of performative allyship or, you know, companies putting this stuff out there and not making the change behind the scenes. I'm glad to say that nowadays that's definitely not the case with Harvey Nash. But in a lot of the conversations I was having with women, I realized that whilst things have come a long way and the world of work has changed, I mean, dramatically for women over the course of my career, we're not there yet. And I heard some tales from clients, candidates, people I know, friends, when we've all been discussing things, that there are still things happening, the less savoury behaviours. That's not that common, but you know, they still go on. And then there's still some structural things and process changes that perhaps need to be looked at that would help women to continue their careers and to maximise their potential. I think the allyship thing in particular. So evidence, I was looking at it, and evidence has shown that companies that engage men in their gender inclusion programs are 96% more like, well, they will have 96% success rate, whereas I think the figure for companies where men weren't actively involved, it's only 30%. And I guess partly that makes sense because it's still the case that men are in a lot of the leadership positions in organizations and most able to influence. So I definitely think it's still very relevant, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that I would definitely regard as allies. And I'm really looking forward to the chat today, because I think one of the things I realized from a lot of the men I was speaking to, and some of whom I would say, you know, allyship's on a spectrum. It's not just you're either an advocate, an amazing ally, or there's some people that are in that bit in the middle, and their biggest question was, what do I need to, you know, what do I need to do to be a good ally? Like, what does it involve? Am I doing it? Am I not doing it? So I think this discussion today is fascinating, and you know, look forward to hearing everybody's views.
And one of the things you just mentioned there was around the stats around when men were actively involved. So do you think allyship is more powerful then when provided by men to women as opposed to being provided by a woman?
No, I think, again, you know, in my career, the big thing now is I feel there's plenty space at the big table. There's not a finite number of seats for women. And so I am going out my way to do anything I can to, you know, not just mentor or sponsor. Sponsorship's really important. And the experience of women is not homogenous. So I don't have children. I had to really actively listen and ask what was going to make a difference for the parents in my team. Many of the people that were working for me that had different circumstances to me. So I think allyship, you can be a female ally as well, and not all women are allies.
No, completely. So Ocko, then, do you see different views on allyship dependent on what region we're in, based on the fact that you work multinationally?
Yeah, I do. And I think what Rona just said around it's a spectrum. it's a progression over time. Every International Women's Day or Diversity Day, which is the other big one for us, people get aware of the fact that they might be on the same point on that scale as a couple of years ago. So simply having that discussion again, and if you then look internationally, either the focus on it has been less in some regions of the world, and the obvious progress we need to do in the environment we operate as a company is different. Operating in the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, the environment, the government support for the cause is completely different than if we go to other regions in the world. So how we act as a company, but in this topic, allies, is different. The conversations are different. What we might feel more basic discussions take place as well. Well, we also need to look at the details while we're maybe talking in this region or the US, which is ahead on this topic.
And then, so do you think there's anything that Nash Squared can particularly do to reduce the differences in mindset to allyship internationally? Absolutely. First of all, we're setting an example internally, and people move from company to company, talk to friends, family, while they are with us. And the standard we set, they bring home, they bring into their community. Secondly, is we speak out. We're standing for this. We're openly expressing our point of view on this. And that's important because it makes it easier if you're an ally or are you in the minority to speak out, to find somebody, something to hold on to, somebody to reach out to. So yes, we can do things. Of course, we need to, and I almost forgot that one, do it correctly as a company ourselves. But we do have influence wider than just our company, and we should take that influence and use that influence. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there are benefits to a company by advocating for diversity and for women. So that probably brings me on to Cliff quite nicely. So you were the first male member of Women at Nash, which is one of our internal committees that specifically advocates for women. So do you find there's any benefits for you as an individual when you provide allyship?
Yeah, definitely. It was a privilege to be asked, and some great people on there. Yeah, it's kind of in my DNA to try and make sure, or try and ensure and help people reach their potential. It's really kind of rewarding to see that. I've got a good example of that historically, where as a project manager, I had a young graduate female software engineer join the team, very talented, but kind of quite low confidence levels. So kind of mentor, I was line manager as well, mentored, looked after her, and it was challenging for her in that environment, very challenging. And she became a senior software engineer and lead engineer, and yeah, really kind of grew. And that's just great to see that happen in that environment, which was a very challenging environment, and then went on to kind of have a young family. So it's just it's fantastic to be able to help people reach their potential. It's a really good thing, very rewarding.
And so therefore, so you mentioned about when you were a project manager, so do you think that influences the way that you provide allyship?
Me personally, no. I kind of would do that naturally anyway, but when you do see that in the working environment and you can see that somebody's got that potential, and you can, you know, have a bit of a chat with them and the other people on the team to ensure that any behaviours are not conducive with them progressing, you kind of challenge that behaviour, and then you see the rewards for that and the outcome of that, of somebody progressing that well and being supported by everybody. That's really rewarding.
Amazing. So Christian, how have you acted as an ally? So being a male, how have you acted as an ally towards women throughout your career?
I think first of all, it's needed to understand what an ally really means actually, and maybe there's some perception that an ally is there as you know, act as a guard or something and tell women what to do, so help them to become better. And no, I see it, and I have seen it differently. So it's more, actually, it's more about trying to get connected with the thoughts of a colleague, of a woman in that case, and try to understand what the person needs in this really moment. And then from there, actively listen and try to understand and support. This is more what I understand with allyship. So I have an example actually from the past, and this is our current senior HR business partner, Central Europe, Anne Schwarz. I met her like 4 or 5 years ago, and I can remember when she started as a talent acquisition manager in another company in which the two of us worked at that time. She was sitting there and maybe looked a little bit, I wouldn't call it desperate, but you know, she was actually lost somehow. But at the same time, I could see the flickering in her eyes, and she really wanted it. I knew that she had 2 kids. She was quite young at that time, had 2 kids, and she really wanted it. So we had some really good conversations, and I tried to find out why she's here and what her plans are and how she sees herself, you know, acting in this role and maybe beyond that. So long story short, she did a pretty good job with the support of others and maybe with the support of myself. And we worked there really successfully for over 2 years. And I left that company. Anna left as well. She went to another competitor. And I got in touch with her like a year ago after I started with Harvey Nash. And we again had a really good conversation. At that time, she acted as a senior talent acquisition manager, and I could convince her to join Harvey Nash in the same role. And again, I saw this potential and this willingness to achieve something and to do the right things. And from that chat, we could tailor a career plan with her, and she acted really successfully in the senior talent acquisition manager role, and just recently was promoted officially to the role of HR manager, senior HR business partner for Central Europe. And Anna does an amazing job, and I'm really convinced if she gets, you know, that kind of allyship and support over time, there's a lot more she can do, not only for that company, but for others and for her whole professional life. So
it's really about targeting it then at that individual, as opposed to just assuming what is needed. It's about speaking to somebody as an individual and providing that support.
Yeah, it's like acting as an advocate, actually, and really let the world know that you really believe in this person, and support like this.
And so you mentioned as well that Anna had 2 children. So having children yourself, do you think that impacts how you feel towards being an ally and allyship in general towards women?
Sure. I mean, that certainly helps to connect with a woman or another person who is in the same situation. Yeah, I mean, I can feel her. Like, so my kid's around every other week for 4 to 5 days, and I have to handle it as well. Like, you know, cooking meals, looking for homework, looking for all the things kids at that age need. So it helps, of course, to connect with the other person who has the same challenges, so that makes to connect with each other even more.
And so Rona, therefore, Christian's talked about how he's provided allyship to an individual. So what sort of allyship have you had in your career?
Well, look, at the time I've had a career, things have changed like beyond recognition. So there wasn't such a thing. There wasn't a word. There wasn't allyship. It was the good guys you could trust, and the ones that were brave enough sometimes to like stand up for you. And it was a different world then. So when Oko and I were discussing stuff and I was giving examples, this is not that long ago, Charlotte, that, the gender pay gap, you would have your manager, it was wild. So, there was no such thing as measuring it and trying to make progress on it. It was men are the breadwinners. Any women that are working in professional roles, we're going to assume the majority of you are just killing time till you have families. So, if we're going to pay more, we're going to pay more to men. The sexual harassment bit was insane. And, now's not probably the time to share the detail of those stories, but it was just rife, and it was often happening at the top of organizations. So there was nobody to go and complain to, because they were the ones that were probably the biggest proponents of the bad behavior. And then if you got to leadership, there was this, you got to toughen up and be a bit more assertive. And then you tried that, and it was, well, can you not soften your style a wee bit and maybe be more feminine? And you just felt like you couldn't win sometimes. So it was completely different, thankfully. However, moving to now, and certainly in our organization, okay, so were companies all doing this, and did the term allyship come up for the right reasons? We had a situation a number of years ago where we had been enthusiastically one of the first recruitment companies to be awarded the National Quality Standard, a really big deal for diversity. And then just during that process, somebody quite senior in the company, there was stuff that happened, and they ended up, exiting from the company because of behaviours to women. And it was like a watershed moment for me, because I remember thinking they'd get a slap on the wrist. That was what happened earlier in my career, and Noko, you mentioned earlier about, I was asking if it was different in the Netherlands. You're like, sadly, we're not this beacon of diversity that's completely perfect. Now that had probably been, I don't know, between 5 and 10 years ago. And it was like, well, if we're putting this out there as a company, we're going to have to stand by that. We can't be hypocrites. So whilst not every company at that point might have been doing it for completely the right reasons, it made a difference to us as women, because we suddenly could go, you need your outside face to match your inside face. And then the allyship thing, it just means that it's not the changes that we're looking to make. It's not often that there's bad stuff happens now. Thankfully, it's in my experience, it's rare. But the times where it does, it's probably not going to happen in front of me as a senior leader. In fact, it's probably not going to happen in front of Oko or Christian or Cliff as senior leaders. And that's why I need to trust that at all levels, if a man makes a comment, even when there's no women there, or there's inappropriate behaviour, that his peer group are going to call him out for it, and it's just not tolerated anymore. And it has, that's been the biggest shift in my career, just to feel like somebody it's not all women that are having to fight this. And the other example that I work really closely with Andy Hayes, who's my counterpart, but for the south of England. And Andy has really taken on, I didn't even, he did the big thing of listening to some of the women that worked for him and really understanding what they needed that was going to make it possible for them to flourish in their working lives. And one of the things that I think it was published this week in the UK that was quite shockingly, I think it was something like £15,000 was the average cost of childcare. And one of the things that some people felt would help them in their circumstances was them and their husbands, partners, each doing a condensed 4-day working week, so that they didn't need 2 days of paid childcare. And then if they were lucky enough to have grandparents about, that would be, 2 days to pay instead of 5. And it was Andy that just went doggedly to fight that cause and to make it happen for some people in his team. So, allyship, it can really help in many ways, both calling out the bad behaviours, but also listening and helping to make the changes that are just going to make it a much better place. And we've all been talking this week. We'd love it to get to the point where there's no need for any of these days and conversations, but it was, the last bad things I saw, they're not that long ago. And the really, really bad stuff was certainly not that long ago. So we've got a way to go yet, I think.
And I think it's a fair thing what you're saying, Rona, is about we don't see, well, basically we don't see anything anymore. If I just look at my day-to-day life, there is no problem anymore. But that's not true, because I don't see it, or you as a leader doesn't see it. Doesn't mean it's not there. You need to be active. If you look at that gradient scale we talked earlier to, it's you need to be aware where you are on that scale. If you're saying, yeah, but I find everybody equal, okay, that's awesome. That's a start. Now look in your surrounding. What's going on? What are you actively doing? Are you speaking up? Are you making a change for somebody? Just because you don't see it doesn't matter. It's not there.
And I think by having these open conversations, Alco, I've seen some people this week saying, International Women's Day, our company's not, and this is sometimes, women who would class themselves as strong feminists, and their argument is our company's not doing anything because it's just, performative, and companies are just posting this stuff. It's all about the change you make behind the scenes. Now, we are making the changes behind the scenes. That's why I think, it's a great place to work. But if we don't have these open conversations, people, hopefully, because we don't know, if we're being really honest, what is the day-to-day working experience of women in every company where we have operations? I couldn't at the moment absolutely answer that. But by having these very open discussions where we say, this is where the bar is, and we appreciate there's societal differences, but actually, as a global organization, we're trying to push for equality and equity in every country that we operate in, for everybody, not just women. Then if there are problems, I would really hope that somebody would reach out to us and, know that they're going to have our absolute support, no questions asked.
And I think that comes back to, as you said, it's about making sure people are outwardly aware, but then that things are going on behind the scenes, so that if they do approach, they know that something will change. And do you think that there are different attitudes towards allyship based on age as well, from your perspective, Rona? So is it more expected nowadays that people will be allies versus where, you were previously at the start of your career?
Yeah, I don't know if everybody else agrees with this, but I was also thinking long and hard about this. So my last really bad experience was about 3 years ago. And the age demographic of that individual was probably, 45 to 55, male. Time before that, certainly somebody over 40. I'm not saying that's the only, but it's really difficult for me to even explain to some of the younger people in my teams, male and female, what that working culture was like only 10, 15 years ago. We worked in a client-facing environment. I was in tech recruitment. I was the only woman in my team for a long time. And I came from a big family, and I could kind of answer back and use my sense of humor to try and I didn't, some of it was funny to me, some of the banter, but there was some of the banter that wasn't funny. And there was a lot of other women that joined that organization that were sort of chewed up and spat out and didn't make it. It was, if you worked in the city at that point, or if you worked in our industry, it was, you had to really be able to stand up for yourself, and it was difficult. And so I think there's still a legacy that there's some people of that generation that just haven't quite evolved and moved on. I would like to think that in the younger generation that equality and the attitudes are better, but I'm sure it's not 100% perfect.
Absolutely. So hopefully naturally that's going to pave the way for future generations to make it so allies aren't as heavily needed for women in the workplace. So Occo, you've been an active ally throughout your career. So do you see that there's times where it's easier for you to provide allyship based on sort of the subject or the person?
It's difficult to be an ally by I wake up and I want to be an ally today. It doesn't work like that, because I look at the world differently than the people we're mostly discussing now, and Rona gave examples of. It doesn't work like that. I will be an ally to anybody. But there are some things you can actively do to make yourself aware that you might not be an ally. If you do something very practical, like put everybody in your team from the highest paid to the lowest paid, cut that team in half, put them next to each other, and see the differences between that team. Is in your one team only women and in the other team only men? Well, usually it's not that clear, but is there an overpopulation? Is there an overpopulation of people in color? Is there an overpopulation in people who are shortly with the company or longer with the company? Are you doing pay equally goes way farther than what the law says. And I don't know each law, but the Dutch one says if you do the same work, you need to get the same pay in a bandwidth. That bandwidth is already causing problems. So just put everybody on a list from top to bottom. You can do this in 2 minutes. It's very easy. Go to your payroll system, just do an export to Excel. It's the sort button, and there it is. You can see how you have been operating in the last few years. So there's things you can do to do it. One of the conversations I had last Wednesday on International Women's Day with somebody was, you hear a lot, it's not only being invited to the party, but it's also being asked to dance. And she went even further and said, yeah, but did I pick the music, and who chose the drinks, and who? It's the full-on part. Sometimes it's just asking, did I do this correctly? I remember a conversation we had a year ago with somebody, and I said, yeah, somebody told me about problems in their youth. I said, I find it hard to talk to you about it because I don't know what's appropriate to ask and how far I can go. And the person gave the feedback, well, the worst thing you can do is to show too much interest. So just ask the questions, talk about it, and that really helps. So sometimes I just call somebody and ask, hey, did I do this correctly? How does this came across to you? And that usually sparks a conversation.
And Occo, I'd sent an email to the global leadership team on International Women's Day, and I shared very openly some of my experiences. And I also shared, though, because I think sometimes we think, okay, those days of, like, one example for me, client entertainment. Now, business was done on the golf course. I'm now learning golf. I fully expect to be a scratch golfer by the summer. So it's only taken me an extra 25 years. But business wasn't just done on the golf course. It was nights out with a lot of alcohol involved, was how client entertainment went. And it was expected that they would quite often end up in a strip club. Now, as a woman, I didn't want to go there, and you'd be the party pooper for not going along. That's just one example. And so when you think, right, okay, it's all changed, it's fine, we're not living in those times anymore. But then over the course of this week, I had seen quite a few different, quite shocking stats. So the fact that the gender pay gap stuff, obviously, and I really like the fact that the gender pay gap bot was calling out all UK companies that were tweeting International Women's Day stuff saying, yeah, but you've gone backwards 20% on the gender pay gap since last year. So it was kind of holding them accountable. Somebody that works in our exec search business, who's a working mum, quite a young child, she'd posted something. Lily had posted about research that showed that 85% of women leave the full-time workforce within 3 years of having their first child, with 19% leaving the workforce altogether. McKinsey research from the end of last year showed that women leaders are leaving companies at the highest rate ever. The gap between men and women in that is the highest it has ever been. And in terms of things like pensions, in the UK, women are retiring with £123,000 less in their pension pot because of the gaps for maternity leave. They went part-time, they got paid a bit less, they had to compromise a wee bit and not push for at times in their career. And then another one that showed that 3 in 5 menopausal women were negatively affected at work. And then in the time period of the survey, close to 1 million women in the UK had left their jobs thanks to menopausal symptoms. So I was like, do you know what? There's still stuff we can work on here, and there's still stuff to fix. And that's before we even get to what is the working experience of people like in some countries that are maybe, don't even have things like the gender pay gap reporting. So yeah, I think I can't even remember what the question was there, Charlotte. I just went in a rant. In fact, everything's not fixed.
We were talking about if there's times where it's easier to be an ally, and you just pointed out some of the key areas where women do need allyship more in their career, potentially around the time of having children, needing more flexibility around menopause. And I think that's really key, that throughout a woman's career, she might not necessarily need the same level of allyship the whole way through. There might be those key times where it is needed more.
Yeah, and I think, look, see, to widen it out a wee bit, it's fascinating that how much the world of work has changed, and the relationship between and the expectations between employee and employer. I think the next big one is going to be potentially around different age groups, demographics, because we're going to be working longer. I read a really fascinating article about an organisation in Sweden that employs, it's a recruitment business, but for older people. And I was speaking to a couple of people and who still do some work, nearly 70, and they were saying, yeah, just, but they don't want to work 12 months of the year necessarily. It's not even about what hours you work, what days you work. It could be that you'll work a few months, then take a few months off for, total flexibility. So I think Okko and Christian, speaking about it's that really generous world-class listening, like sitting down with somebody, and it requires focus, sincerity, empathy, not interrupting them, and genuinely valuing that other person's viewpoint and experiences, and then thinking what you could do to accommodate and make their working life an easier journey. And women definitely need that. They're not the only group that need that, but those stats really showed for me that we do need to be working on that, and we need allies to make that change happen as quickly as possible.
And I think the examples are very good as well. It as a white male, it confronts me every time with what's happening in the world. And if it's the numbers or the personal stories, and I recently spoke with a very successful lawyer who has her own firm, and we talked about getting there, and she told me, yeah, but okay, I was supposed to I started this firm as an alternative because I was supposed to be partner at 35, but I had 3 kids. So between that time from 25 to 35 is a decade, and I missed out 3 years, 30% less time to prove that I was partner worthy. From somebody so successful, so accomplished, and great person as well, to hear that, it was really confronting.
Mm-hmm. And Okko, you mentored somebody that is in my leadership team. I'm quite proud of the fact my leadership team has more women than men. It wasn't by design. I now have a diversity problem that I think I need to hire more men into my leadership team. But I think one of the things that I was most delighted about was that person was looking to step up and lead a full P&L business unit in a senior role, and felt comfortable being really open about the fact that they were wanting to start a family, and got appointed on that basis. And when I think about the difference back to when I was a similar age, I remember a female boss actually saying to one of my colleagues who'd recently got married, well, we're not going to be promoting you because you're just going to go off and have kids now.
Yeah.
It's alarming when you hear things like that, and obviously it's great to see that the world is changing, but obviously there's still a long way to go. So Cliff, do you think there's ever going to be a point where allyship for women is no longer required? We can't hear you, Cliff. I think your mic's up.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. It's difficult to gauge that, isn't it? How are we going to measure this? If we just keep everybody, we're going to keep doing the right thing all the time, and so I think it's always going to be there personally, and it's something that we just need to keep an eye on and keep chipping away at it and doing the right thing. So I think it's something that we need to be mindful of all the time, personally.
And so if we have got that utopia view of that there will be a time when we don't need allyship, how far away do we think we are with that? And that can be to any one of you on the panel. So does anyone think that we're sort of very close, it's within years, it's within our reach, or do we think there's still a considerable amount of way to go?
This will be certainly many, many decades, in my opinion, unfortunately. But you know, hopefully when we get there and have this vision fulfilled, it will not confront us with the opposite extreme. And I think it's really important, yeah, as at the moment and for many years we will have, or we should be supportive of women, you know, getting like equal with men, and in my opinion shouldn't forget to take care of the very talented men on that way, and yeah, try to do some polarity management and keep everything in balance, that we really take care of the most talented people we are surrounded with, neither they are men or women. At the moment it's obvious women are in need for allies and for certain support. My long-term version is that everyone gets the same, you know, support and the same level, nevertheless, if they are women or men.
And so I know a lot of people probably on the call are wanting to know how they can be a better ally. So Christian, what advice would you give to somebody if they said, how can I be a better ally to women in the workplace?
I mean, first and foremost, it's about action, actually. It's about being active and being of active support, and not waiting for something to happen, not waiting to be asked to do something, but really walk through every day with open eyes and yeah, watch out for opportunities to offer support in a meaningful way. Talk to different colleagues, individuals, and yeah, try to, as Okko said, try to listen to their stories, or as Runa said, don't try to interrupt too early. Just, you know, let them talk. Go into that kind of coaching mindset. Ask open questions and be patient, listening to the stories. And if you do so, I'm absolutely convinced we will find out about the needs and the reasons or the options to support, or where people need support will become obviously, like, automatically, right? And that's the most important thing. And some people think about, maybe in my opinion, too much about really big vision and try to change the world, which is a good, in principle, a good vision, a good idea. But there's a nice Chinese saying I like a lot, and that says, you know, before you go out to change the world, walk 3 times through your own house. And yeah, doing so is what I think of biggest support, actually. So long story short, go out there every day with open eyes, and you will find people who need support, and then act on that.
Brilliant. And then the same question to you, Rona. So again, as the only woman on the panel, so what do you think people could do to be a better ally to women in the workplace?
So I think I kind of made the point first, just listen. And it's that, really proper, generous, world-class listening that you need to master. Secondly, respect the space. Women's conferences and ERGs are often grown out of marginalisation, discrimination, so tread respectfully. I think it's a really interesting thing, and I know this is a generalisation, but women tend to give support by empathising with their female friends and saying, oh yes, and I'm going to listen to you and you're going to tell me about your problem. Men tend to try and actively solve the problem quite often. It's just a trait. And that's not necessarily what we're looking for you to do. So tread respectfully. And before you sort of jump in with a solution or talk, revisit my first point of just listening. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, I think. So Okko, you were really open in your response to my email where I outlined all the things that I've experienced both in the past and unfortunately more recently. And you said, I just don't know what to say, like that is, yeah. You're going to encounter some uncomfortable, if you're having those conversations with women and you have those conversations in a way that they are really opening up to you about what it's always like, you're going to sometimes feel guilt that you personally may not really warrant feeling. And then I would say engage in supportive partnerships with women. I think somebody spoke about it, and it's about there's that one type of allyship. The other type of allyship that some of you spoke about, I would say, is almost like sponsorship. It's kind of bridged that line. And that's a kind of tridactic relationship, I feel, between the ally, the sponsor, the mentee, the woman, and the audience. And what really you can help do is to amplify their voice and make sure that they're heard and that they get seen for opportunity. And in the past, a lot of the conversations that were happening around promotion or the big opportunities might be happening behind closed doors, and that's where your support can be really valuable. But remember the 2 points to male allyship, I guess, is that you obviously are expected and it's a kind of given that you would be expressing as little sexism yourself, and as Christian, you put it, walking 3 times around your own house before you go out and try and solve the problems of the rest of mankind. But that's maybe the easy part, because when the time comes, those of you who are really truly our allies, you won't just stand back and kind of have a wry smile and keep your mouth shut when somebody does make a comment, even if it's not that easy. Be brave, and on some of the structural stuff like policies and things as leaders, maybe be prepared to be a bit disruptive and upset the status quo.
No, all very good points, Rona and Christian. Thank you for that. So we're going to go to our audience now. We've had a couple of questions come in whilst we've been talking. So the first one being, as a father of 2 successful young women, I feel I'm a strong supportive ally to them, but maybe that's just me being a dad. I've always made them feel safe and not afraid of failure or afraid to question and call out when something is wrong. But how do I do that in the workplace without sounding like a dad and therefore sounding patronising? Do you want to have a go at this one, Rona, or okay?
If I can, yes, please. I don't think you sound like a dad. I think Rona just answered this question halfway. Just listen. Just start there. Just do what you consider with your daughters is a normal conversation. Why would it just be with your daughters a normal conversation? Just because we have certain ways we deal in a corporate environment, that's maybe what we sort of want to lose. So have an open conversation. It doesn't have to be a bullet point meeting. A conversation is fine. And congratulations, Mark, on bringing 2 women up and support them in being successful.
And Mark's put a smiley face in response to that, so he's happy with your answer.
I think what's really interesting there that I'm reading between the lines because Mark can't talk back to us here, but I do think, you know, we live in times where sometimes people are worried about doing the wrong thing. Men are worried about doing the wrong thing, like approaching this the wrong way, and so they might hold back from taking action, and then it's probably for good reason. I mean, there's been some women's conferences and ERGs where the women had bingo cards for the male panelists, you know, and it was like, you know, buzzword bingo. I'm a strong feminist. I'm a dad of two. You know, and it was like, you know, they were ticking them off. But actually, I personally don't feel that way. I think if you've got a good heart, you're a decent human, and you're trying your best. I think that's where also, if you're not sure and there's more specific conversations, it goes right back to the having a conversation, listening. But ask people like Charlotte and I, do you think I approached this right? You know, what else can I do? Because we're going to try and help you if you're coming at it with the right intentions.
No, completely agree. Another question from the audience is, what other examples do we have within Nash Squared that demonstrate strong allyship, and how as a company are we promoting allyship?
I've got loads of really good ones. You know, I have felt for a while I was definitely the odd one out on the global leadership team. As you know, let's call it out for what it is. And thankfully, the level below, we've got gender parity, so that, you know, we are quickly and rapidly addressing the problem. But I was working in a big job in a challenging set of conditions during COVID and periods of change where my peer group was all male, and I felt nothing but supported by them. And I could go on for ages about allyship. And when I did face that one-time difficult challenges, I really felt there was people that would have my back and stand up and be counted when it mattered. I think at a lower level, I can see quite a lot of examples in my teams as well. But I'm sure other people, Charlotte, I don't know, if you, as another woman, have you seen good examples that you would call out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work very closely with a group of males. Obviously, I'm in the tech industry on the solution side of our business. So there generally are less females, but there are definitely male advocates within there. So a couple of people that I work with now have said things like, you know, if you ever go off and have a baby, we will make it work. We will try and work around you. We'll have those conversations. And things like that really mean a lot. Obviously, you have to put your money where your mouth is to a certain extent. I'm not there yet. So there's a difference between saying it and doing it. But I absolutely have strong allies that I would class as allies within the business who help promote, support, and really do deliver on that allyship that I think we've been talking around today. I think another thing that I would like to point out is that quite often when we talk about women, there is a difference between the confidence that women have in themselves and pushing themselves forward, and there is for men. And that is by no means saying that is always the case, but women tend to be a lot less confident. And I think that's something that if you can spot in somebody, but you can see their potential, it's definitely worth opening up that conversation and having that supportive, mentoring, allyship type conversation and playing that role for that person.
I think another one, we were on a call, you came on and it was a scheduled mentorship session with Keegan, who is a senior member of our leadership team in the US. And at our Strategic Connect conference, it was actually me who said to Keegan, I've really enjoyed our chat, if you'd like. And I didn't say, if you want me to be your mentor, it wasn't quite as formulaic as that, but I said, you know, we could keep chatting, have a chat every now and then, every few weeks. And I think I get as much out of it as she does. But she sent me a lovely email this week just about how much of a difference it made. But on our call, she had shared, I wouldn't have had the kind of confidence to ask you to do it, but I did really want to ask you. So I guess there's me saying that was an example of me trying to be a female ally to other women with potential in the business. But her actual boss, she did an interview this morning. I mean, Jason is absolutely a male ally, and he, more than that, he will champion the cause for the women in his team, and in the senior conversations happening behind closed doors, he will be trying to push forward and amplify the voices of the women in his team. He goes above and beyond doing that. So I think that would be another couple of examples from the US for me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we previously spoke about, Rona, was you were saying you don't have to just be an ally to the people that work with you. So one of the examples you gave was around when there was male members of the team and acting as an ally to their partner. I don't know if you want to elaborate more on that, because that was really interesting.
So I had a woman that was hugely talented that worked for me in the early days when I did the startup business in Scotland, which is the first role that I had. And it was hard work and it was crazy, hours. And this was before COVID, before flexible working became the norm. And she she'd had a family, got remarried and had a young child a bit later on. And she would be running herself ragged, trying to get to pickups and drop-offs. And she was paying a fortune for a parking space to try and make it easier. And eventually she left a professional career where she was one of the best in the business. Because her husband actually just didn't do any of it, didn't support her at all. And so I kind of thought, do you know what, I need to try and be part of this change. So anybody who's, any men in my team who had recently become parents, become fathers, this was before HR in our business was quite so structured, and we didn't have great paternity leave and things. So I'd be saying to them, I'm encouraging you to take this time off. And then I would say to them, and I'm really supportive, fully expect you'll be doing your share of pickups, drop-offs. We didn't have meetings at those times because I thought, well, those women don't work for me, they work somewhere else. But hopefully if I can set the right tone here and everybody else does their bit, there will be some change.
No, and I think that feeds quite nicely into one of our other questions from the audience, which was, what about modernising our maternity leave policy? So looking at our policies as well and being progressive with those. I don't know if anyone wants to input into that around policies.
I know that recently in the UK, certainly for leadership roles, I recently had the full support of HR to change it and modernise it and improve it, because it was relevant for me because I had somebody in a leadership position going off on maternity leave. Obviously, none of us know the specifics of each country's, but if there's something that somebody feels isn't industry, standard or really as good as it could be, then I would say either reach out to one of us or to HR, because there is an appetite for change at the moment. Obviously, things need to work for the business. It can't be outrageous, but we do want to be seen to be a leading employer for parents.
I just want to echo that the question was anonymously and spoke about our policies. Do send an email. Find a way. We internally have a system called Hive. You can anonymously talk to our CEO, Bev White. So if you want to do it anonymously, that's the route. And I'm sure you got emails from our Hive survey, and one will start shortly again. So there's more than enough room there to do it anonymously. But even better, send one of us, send me, send anybody else on this panel an email, send anybody in the executive or GLT an email. We will listen. We will talk to you. We will listen. And we'll take it from there. I can't promise you get everything you ask for, but you will be taken seriously.
Thanks for that. And then the last question before we all dive off is from Kadeen, who's in one of the apprentices at Crimson. So she is an aspiring young person getting into tech, a young woman getting into tech. And her question is, what do you think the technology sector will look like if our gender equality goals are met?
Oh, to have the enthusiasm of youth. I'm assuming you're quite. I just think the gender equality in the tech sector is going nowhere fast at the moment, unfortunately. If we could get there, it would be amazing, 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 amazing. It's been my biggest thing that I've been championing and banging the drum for my entire career. But I think what we keep talking about is now there's not enough people going in that are studying the right subjects at school, going to university with the pipeline. And so we're saying, well, we're pushing the problem that it's not going to be fixed for the next 10 years or the next 10 years. It would be brilliant, because do you know what? I don't think any of us disagree that balanced teams, not just gender, it's just great working in a team of all different types of people, and you get the best ideas. It's the most fun. Charlotte, you work in the tech side of our business. Do you see it changing in the near future?
What I will say is, since I've worked for a Nash Square company, Crimson, there has been a big difference in the time that I've worked for them. So I've worked for the company for 4 years, and when I first joined, there was one other woman in the team. And now we're not talking about one other woman in the team, we're talking that's massively increased. Now, when I'm saying massively increased, we're nowhere near where we're seeing equal levels, but the change in those 4 years has been massive. And I think,
and is the apprenticeship scheme that was mentioned there,
yeah,
I see that as a big part of the solution, because you can bring in women that may not have considered, you know, that as a university choice or taking quite the right subjects at school, but then you help inspire them, Charlotte, and train them up as apprentices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I would say is that it's easy to inspire people when they can look up and they can see somebody that looks like them and has a life like them. So I think there's still quite a long way to go when you look at exco boards across businesses, etc., especially in the tech industry. Are there many women sitting on those? Can you see that often? And I think that will help inspire and bring that equality when that starts to happen more so. That concludes our panel for the day. So thank you to all of our panelists. So thank you for giving your time and input into this. It has been amazing to hear some different viewpoints from both Rona, yourself as a woman, and from Cliff, Christian and Ocko as men, and seeing how things have changed throughout the years. I think, to summarise what we've heard today, we are definitely moving in the right direction, but we are absolutely not the whole way there yet. So there's an importance in having an equality mindset, but also making sure that we understand that what different generations are expecting. So the newer, younger generation are expecting equality. So therefore, as a business, we need to deliver that. Saying one thing that you're fair is not sufficient. So you have to actively advocate. You have to actively provide allyship. You can't just say that you're fair to everybody, because unfortunately, that means that women sometimes will be left on the sidelines. And avoid stereotyping. It's probably our biggest takeaway here, is that make sure you speak and treat people as individuals. See what they need, see what you can do to help them, and then tailor your advice or your mentorship, allyship accordingly. Thank you to our audience for watching and submitting your questions to the panel. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to speak to anyone on LinkedIn. Our inboxes are open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte, for organising this and chairing it. It's been a really nice way. It's a very sunny day here in Scotland, and it's a lovely way to end the week of International Women's Day activities.
No problem. Thank you all so much. See you later.
See you later.